day, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Leaders Podcast. Leaders Podcast gives me the opportunity to speak to some of the most influential leaders in the intelligence and investigation space. Today, I've got an interesting guest. I'm joined by David Marchant, who is the CEO and owner of OffshoreAlert. David Marchant's a dual citizen of the UK and the US, and he's founder and CEO of Miami-based OffshoreAlert, which publishes news and documents and holds conferences about high-value international finance. I know David, and he's an interesting chap. I just want to read this one sentence before I get him to introduce himself. David and OffshoreAlert have been sued and threatened many times by fraudsters, several of whom were later imprisoned, including one for 17 years in Oregon and another for 14 years in London. David Marchant, welcome to Leaders. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Could you just elaborate a little bit about your background before we get into a detailed discussion?
I'll try and give the abbreviated version. I was educated at Monmouth Comprehensive School in Wales until I was 17. And then when I was 17 and 18, I went to a private school, Monmouth School, which is a very well regarded school. So I've experienced the public, the state school system and the private school system. My first job in journalism was in the South Wales Valleys during the miners' strike. So I lived in a town called Ebbw Vale where the unemployment rate was about 25%. It was a coal mining and steelworking town, and the miners went on strike for just less than 1 year, which you think about that, all the strikes you've read about. I mean, they went on strike, but they had nothing to begin with, right? Jeez. And yet they still went on strike. And that was fundamentally a battle between Margaret Thatcher, who was Prime Minister, and Arthur Scargill, who was the head of the National Union of Mine Workers. And then 6 years later, I was living and working in Bermuda, where the unemployment rate was essentially zero, right? It was let's say it was negligible. And it's whereas Ebbw Vale was a microcosm of socialism, and the local MP at the time was Michael Foot.
Right.
All right. He was the MP for the wider area called Blaenau Gwent. He had the biggest majority in the House of Commons when I lived in that area.
Were you still doing journalism? Journalism in Bermuda or something different?
Yeah, no. I've been a journalist all my working career.
Right. Okay.
Now in Bermuda, it's a microcosm of capitalism, right? So my education is state school, private school. My work experience, it's is completely socialist area to a completely capitalist area. And I went to work for the Royal Gazette daily newspaper in Bermuda. 60,000 population in Bermuda. It's got a huge international business sector, which is mainly insurance and reinsurance.
Yeah.
And reinsurance is like insurance for insurance companies. It's like a bookmaker laying off his or her bets. And I went there as a news reporter. My first day at work, they told me, you'll be covering business. And I knew nothing about business. I knew nothing about any form of business, much less this quite complicated international specialty business that was being transacted in Bermuda. But as part of my journalism training in Cardiff, I had to pass a 100 words per minute shorthand test, where somebody gave a speech, you had to take it down in shorthand, then you had to type it out in longhand, and I think you were allowed up to 10 mistakes, and a mistake being, you put a colon instead of a semicolon or something, right? Or you put instead of the, you put there or something, right?
Right.
And so in Bermuda, even though I knew nothing about what I was covering,
Hmm.
I used to, I was very good at shorthand. I used to quote people verbatim, let them tell the story. So, I assumed or presumed that they knew what they were talking about because I didn't know what I was talking about. So, hey, you bail me out here. And then I just got into it. I thought, well, this is quite interesting. And I was in Bermuda for 6.5 years. And during that time, I interviewed 3 billionaires. And subsequently, 2 of them went to prison. And the one who was the weirdest of the 3 was the one who didn't go to prison.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've been around the block, and I don't have a degree. I never studied for a degree. I never wanted a degree. I wanted to get out there in the world and make my own way. Survive, live or die by my own wits.
Yeah.
And the experience is the best. Experiences is the best form of education one can have.
Yeah, completely. And then what did you do after that? Move back to the UK?
Well, I got kicked out of Bermuda really just for doing my job. By kicked out, I mean that they would no longer give me a work permit. Even though Bermuda is a UK overseas territory, UK nationals need a work permit to work there. Conversely, Bermudians are automatically entitled to a UK passport and can just go to the UK wherever they want and work,
Right.
without any special paperwork. And Bermuda is very protective of its reputation. The last thing they want is, somebody raised in South Wales with a chip on each shoulder that's obligatory when you're raised in South Wales, running around, lifting up the proverbial carpet to see what's underneath there. And I sort of did that maniacally. I didn't really care. I tend to operate on an unfiltered basis. I don't look too far ahead. If I come across fraud, I will tend to expose it, and deal with the consequences as and when they come in. So Bermuda didn't want that. They didn't want me working there. So I left Bermuda. And while I was waiting for basically financing to come through, I spent a couple of months sleeping on my mother's couch in the Forest of Dean.
Right. Very nice.
Selling and trying to make money on Sundays at car boot sales. My dad was a fertilizer salesperson. He used to sell to Princess Anne, for example. So he had a couple of hundred of these very large, oversized buckets that he somehow got. I don't really know where he got them from, but had no use for them. So I used to sell those from my mother's car boot in a field in the Forest of Dean on a Sunday after being kicked out of Bermuda, waiting for my financing to come through. And when it did, I formed OffshoreAlert. And this is an insight into my mentality. I got kicked out of Bermuda and I thought, okay, all right, let's see how this works out for you. I thought when I launched my company in Florida, I formed it in '96, launched 2 products in '97, 2 newsletters. One was called Inside Bermuda.
Oh, God.
That was and then I might as well call it I'm going to show you, news.
Gee.
And one was called Inside Bermuda, which was just about, it was really an insurance and reinsurance newsletter, and the other was called OffshoreAlert. I used to, I would research the stories, write the stories, design the newsletter in Microsoft Publisher, and then I would, to distribute it, I distributed it by Cable and Wireless's broadcast fax. So my marketing strategy for the first edition was I just gathered a bunch of business cards, like from friends and associates, compiled a list in the cable and wireless system, and I was going to give the first edition away for free. It was a monthly newsletter, two newsletters. So after researching, writing, designing, I would send the product. I'd get a phone, stick it in two suckers, right? Yeah, and you had to make sure it was like airtight, and it would transmit the data to cable and wireless. And then cable and wireless would transmit it to, the email addresses I plugged in. And I got my first my first monthly telecommunications bill from cable and wireless was $20,000. So this is in 1997, and I thought, maybe I ought to rethink this. You know? Yeah. But how compounding my naivety was the fact that after I sent the first one for free, so this strange newsletter just showed up on people's fax machines. I realized I hadn't put any contact information at all.
So they didn't know where it came from.
I mean, like, what an idiot, right? Like, what an idiot. Yeah. So I had to adjust my marketing strategy to giving away the first two editions, right? Not just the first one, you know. And of course, the second edition contained a subscription form and the company name, telephone number, address, and so on. So that was the genesis of what is now Offshore Alert. And as technology evolved, we morphed into what we are now, which is, as it should be. Whenever you get news and documents, you should just send it out in a timely manner. It shouldn't be once a month. There should be no deadline, really. You get something, you're churning it out, because as you know, in fraud investigations and particularly asset recovery, time is of the essence. You can't be waiting around. No, you've got to act, and you've got to act decisively. So Offshore Alert and Inside Bermuda has morphed into this one thing, and now I'm just churning out information under the name Offshore Alert. And the conferences, we've held, I think, 21 annual conferences in Miami, 11 in London, where we've held 2 in Bangkok. We held one in Sao Paulo, one in Marbella in Spain. And the genesis of those was I was getting sued so many times for libel, I needed to introduce a new revenue stream. And just to give you an indication of how bad the situation was in the early days, there were 1 or 2 years where my legal fees, my own legal fees, exceeded just defending libel actions, right? No other sort of action other than a defamation action. Yeah. My own legal fees exceeded the entire revenue of the company. So forget about paying any other bills, right? Yeah. Like just my own legal fees, and of course that's financially unsustainable. So I had to think about it a lot. I wasn't just getting sued; I was getting threatened.
What type of threats?
Well, like if you go to our website at offshorealert.com, many companies have a testimonials page saying how great they are. Yeah. Well, I thought about what I do for a living, and I thought, you know what, the best endorsement of my work is a bad person saying I'm scum of the earth. It's the best endorsement for what I do. So if you go to, we have an anti-testimonials section, you can hear some of the death threats. We have recordings of some of them. So I'll give you an example. Before one of our Miami conferences, it was the first morning, just before proceedings had started, I took a call on my mobile, and it was a guy saying it with a Bahamian accent, saying they were from the Bahamas, saying, listen, I just want you to know there's a contract out on your life. that
Right.
it was offered to me, to the person calling in, but I turned it down. I'm just calling you to warn you.
Wow.
So,
And that's on the day of the conference. That's on the
this was the
day.
first morning,
The first.
first morning of the first day of a 2.5 day conference. So I don't get rattled that easy, and in the run up to the conference, I've been getting threatening calls. So I interpreted this as, this is just an extension of intimidation where there is no, or the guy said the contract was now being offered in Jamaica. He turned it down, it was now being offered in Jamaica. So I thought it through and I thought, you know what, listen, I think it's just part of the intimidation process.
Does that not worry you, though, David? Does it not worry you, the safety side of things?
I'll tell you, at that stage, not particularly, but any journalist will tell you that when you get sued, for example, right, listen, certainly me, and as far as I'm aware, other journalists, I used to get a knot in my stomach. Like, I've been sued when I work for other people, for other news organizations, and I used to get a knot in my stomach, and it wouldn't go away until the lawsuit went away. Well, it's like anything else, right? The more experience you have of something, then the better you are able to cope with it. It's just anything in life. And so it got to this. So I can remember I got threatened by a Russian. And Russians don't mess around, right? They'll kill journalists like this. And this guy basically threatened me, and he did it cleverly. He didn't say, I'm going to kill you. This is another guy, right? A Russian guy who lived in New York. He didn't say, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to do this to you, I'm going to do that to you. No. It was, oh, you don't know who you're dealing with. And I can remember what I said, well, I think I'm getting a pretty good idea, And I can remember saying to this guy, listen, what you've just said, I consider to be a threat. He'd said something. I said, I consider that to be a threat. And it didn't faze him. He was saying, well, I don't know what your psychological profile is. And, I felt so threatened that I didn't sleep at my home for a couple of days. I slept at a friend's house. When I put my key in my car ignition, somewhere in my brain, I thought, well, maybe the car's going to explode. So this is not rational, right?
No.
So I was, in the early days, I was scared. Like anyone out there, if the person who scared me is listening to this, well, good job. You did a great job. But, it forced me to think it all through. And I thought, you know what, if I'm going to react like this, I shouldn't really do this for a living. I should do something else. I should only continue doing this for a living if I can cope with the stress. And trust me, there's been extreme stress. And this is when you find out who you are, right? You find out who you are as a person in extreme situations. So I went through a thought process, and I really thought about it. I didn't get drunk. I don't do drugs. I think things through, right? And I came to the conclusion of, fuck it, and I haven't looked back. So this guy was, saying there's a contract on my life. That happened subsequent to that. And by the way, the guy who threatened me, we've got a picture of the fucker on our website, under investigations because he went to prison. See, a nasty habit, a nasty consequence of people who threaten me or sue me is that they go to prison. And that's another part of our website. So I had to think, so going back to, it's financially unsustainable to spend more than you're making just on your own legal fees. So okay, how do I resolve this? Like how? The only true resolution is to stop people, is to deter people from suing you. So you can either do that by just not exposing anyone, which is impractical considering I'm running an investigative news website. It's like asking a donut shop to stop selling donuts. Yeah. And I thought, you know what? okay, this is the genius solution I've come up. I've got to make these people afraid of me. Normally, journalists, any investigative journalist will tell you that, they get sued, they're terrified. People threaten them, they're terrified. It's almost constant one-way stress and threats, right? I had to flip this. How do I flip it? You know what? I've got to earn my spurs. So the first person to sue me for libel, Mark Harris, we actually went through a trial. I went through a libel trial.
Wow,
like not many people can say a lot of people say they've been sued. I actually went on trial, and it was a 6-day bench trial. And I accused this guy of money laundering, including the proceeds of narcotics trafficking, and stealing his client's funds. He was an American CPA based in Panama. Sues me, and I've got to justify in court all of my stories, sentence by sentence. Jesus, man, it's hard going. And we won. There was a 17-page judgment from the judge, all in our favor, not one word of criticism. The guy's group collapsed. He went on the run to Nicaragua. The US, I cooperated with the criminal division of the IRS. He was arrested at traffic lights in Managua. His car stopped at traffic lights. The local police just, cordoned him off.
Yeah.
No extradition proceedings. They deported him, put him on a plane where there were US Marshals waiting, and he was arrested, I suppose, technically when they entered US airspace. Yeah. Anyway, yada, yada, yada. He pleaded not guilty to fraud and money laundering. He was found guilty. I covered his trial. He received 17 years in prison. And this was in Miami. When I sent you my bio, I mistakenly said it was in Oregon. You mentioned Oregon earlier, but it was actually in Miami. It was at federal court in Florida. I think it was actually in Fort Lauderdale. And we let everybody know, and we got sued again. And 5 of their officers were criminally indicted. One died pending trial. The other 4 were, I think they pleaded guilty and received a variety of sentences, including imprisonment, and so on and so forth. And that most of that was in like the late 1990s, early 2000s. But as recently as 2022, another guy who sued me, and I told him what I would do to him. Because when you sue somebody for defamation, before you sue, you actually have to. It's a technical requirement. You have to contact the person and ask for an apology or retraction, etc. Right? And then if one isn't forthcoming, then you can sue. So I told his lawyer what would happen. Listen, you can believe me or not believe me, it's up to you, but I can tell you what's going to happen. And what's going to happen is I'm going to do everything you bring this lawsuit, I'm going to do everything I can to put your client in prison. Now, I can't guarantee I will. That's beyond my control. What I have full control over, right, is whether I'm going to do everything in my power to put your client in prison. And you've got to be a moron in 2022 if you're not aware of the history, which I helpfully pointed out in correspondence. Here are case numbers if you don't believe me. Oh, whatever. We're still going to sue you. That guy got sentenced to 14 years in prison in 2022. His business partner got sentenced to, I think it was something like, it was several years, 7 years, something like that in I think that was last year, 2024. So there still are some people who are dumb enough. It's a myth that fraudsters are bright. Not in my experience. They're dumber than a box of rocks.
Right, but you've still got to pay you've still got to finance all of these legal cases, right? You've still got to finance a defense.
Well, so listen. So my thought process, I'm going to make people afraid to sue me, right? That's right. The ultimate insurance policy, and most people don't sue me. So right. You get the odd outliers who are dumber than even the dumb crooks who I typically deal with. But most crooks are smart enough. It doesn't matter, to commit fraud, to rip off old people, pensioners, leave behind misery, and tell them to F off when they come looking for some sort of satisfaction. You're not thinking like a normal person. A normal person, by definition, right, a normal person doesn't behave like that. So you can say that fraudsters are by definition like mentally different, but I can tell you now they're capable, most of them are capable of rational thought in two areas. One, they don't want to go to prison, and two, they don't want to give up their assets. So what I'm bringing to the table is, hey, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do everything. You sue me, I'm going to do everything I can to put you in prison. I'm going to work with asset recovery attorneys for free, just for fun,
Right.
To make you lose your assets, and most of them, that is effective. You get one or two people who don't believe me, they maybe think they're smarter than me, and two of those are now in prison in England. So listen, I can do, so I don't really, now listen to this will make you laugh. I had a guy, a fake whistleblower, right? Somebody's made it clear by claiming to be a whistleblower for a bank that is not true. And he contacted me. He wanted me to disinvite one of his former employees as a speaker at our London conference.
Oh, right. Okay.
I did my research and told the guy, I said, no, I don't think so. I've done research on both of you. Yeah, the speaker's fine. You, on the other hand, he's a convicted criminal. He's got multiple judgments against him, like for things like writing bad checks in casinos for tens of thousands of dollars for chips to gamble with, and then the checks were dishonored. So he says, okay, I'm going to sue you. So he's going to sue me because I didn't disinvite his former employee. And he doesn't just say this, he puts it in writing in a LinkedIn message. And guess what? He sued me at federal court in Pennsylvania, which was dismissed. And then he just sued me again in Florida, which is ongoing. In both of those cases, I built up enough goodwill with law firms that they represented me in the one action that's over pro bono, and another law firm is representing me pro bono in the active matter, that my chances of losing are precisely this. Somebody's trying to bully me, and it doesn't really work. And then other things that have happened to me, listen, I've had people visit my mother, my elderly mother in rural England. That happened. They set up, it was so wacky, they set up a website with her photos of her house, her home address, her telephone number, the links to nearby bed and breakfast should anyone want to visit my house. This was set up by a fucking journalist,
Really?
journalist, believe it or not, who was working with crooks. I contacted the cable. It was hosted by Cable and Wireless. The website was hosted by Cable and Wireless in the Netherlands. I called them. And I said, listen, just go to the website. You can see, it's just aimed at, harassment. They weren't going. They said, oh, we're going to keep it up and not. This is 20 years ago. Different attitude. Right. Yeah. We're going to keep it up. We're not going to do anything. Okay, all right. This is what's going to happen if you don't do it. I'm going to go marching to a federal court in the United States. I'm going to get an injunction, right? It's going to affect your entire fucking business, right? They removed it because I threatened them.
See, that must be difficult, David. I take it.
It's very difficult.
You can handle the stress.
Well, the thing with stress is, it's a silent killer. You don't know whether you're handling it or not.
Yes, but But you look like, you know what you're involved in. It's the people around you, right? Like you just said, your mother's address was put on the internet.
Right. Listen, anything to me, anything directed at me, listen, it involves other people. And, basically, I was in Miami. My mother, there was a 5-hour time difference. There's sometimes a 4-hour and sometimes a 5-hour, and because we put the clocks back differently. But my mother called me at 4:00 in the morning, my time, which was 9:00 in the morning, UK time, to say, hey, 2 people have just visited me, and they're going to come back. They said, she told them, I need to speak with my son. They told her, well, it's the middle of the morning. So they had it all figured out, But, listen, I'll answer the phone any time of day or night.
No, of course.
Somebody has a story, for example. I mean, I couldn't care less if it's 1:00 in the morning, 10:00 in the morning. I'm open for business 24/7. So she told me, and, of course you have to think about, how do I cope with this? And they did return, and I told her to get somebody else in the house. They took photos of her house. And of course, the person who did that lived in Panama. So I'm thinking, you feel like, part of you feels like getting on a plane, going to Panama, beating the shit out of it, without a care in the world, just rage fueled. And then you think, well, that's the consequences of that not going to be positive.
Yeah, exactly.
And that same guy was later running a double-digit, guaranteed return investment fund. And I exposed it. This is sometime later. I exposed it and tipped off the local regulator in Panama, and they closed it down. And then he stuck my head on the body of somebody. So I exposed this fraudulent group,
right?
And they were in business with a terrorist.
Oh, right.
When I say a terrorist, the guy who was accused of masterminding the Achille Lauro hijacking, Monza Alcazar. And when I'd exposed this fraudulent investment group, I managed to get a picture of the head of the fraudulent investment group with Monza Alcazar, who he fleetingly got into business with, and they were shaking hands. After I exposed this other thing in Panama, this guy superimposed my head on the body of this fraudster, put out a wanted notice offering $100,000 reward, which I'm sure he didn't have because the guy didn't have a pot to piss in, for information leading to, the arrest and conviction of David Marchant for any crime that anyone could get evidence that I'd committed, Listen, I've had a lot of wacky experiences. I exposed many in the late 1990s, early 2000s. The island of Grenada, the government of Grenada went into business with criminals to sell banks and bank licenses. So they would give licenses to bank licenses to ordinary IBCs without any regard to capitalization requirements or fit and proper requirements of people running it. So I think they licensed in excess of 40 basically regular IBCs. So somebody would pay an incorporator would pay $500 for each IBC, and then they would resell them to like American physicians and others for $50,000 a piece on the basis that, hey, that it's licensed, you've got your own financial institution, and then the physician would offer high yield certificates of deposit for anyone stupid enough to give them money. And I expose, OffshoreAlert exposed like dozens of these. Pretty much every one they licensed, we exposed, and we got sued. And the chief regulator in Grenada, Michael LaCorte, provided an affidavit in support of the legal action against me, saying that this particular bank was in full compliance with the law.
Right.
When there was a corresponding criminal action a few years later, which, like I said, you sue me for libel, hey, it's going to be a corresponding criminal action. I can all but guarantee it, or I can guarantee I'll do everything I can to make it happen. And during that criminal action, he admitted to U.S. Department of Justice investigators that he'd committed perjury when providing an affidavit to the crooks for the libel action. He admitted it. He admitted under oath in the criminal action that he had committed perjury under oath in the libel action, So
crazy.
I've been subject to a corrupt FBI agent.
What keeps you going, David? You're at the sharp end. Looks like you've been at the sharp end for a long time. What keeps you going in that mindset?
Well, I did say earlier that, everyone raised in South Wales has a chip on each shoulder. And, it's difficult to say, I'm not going to give some glib answer. Humans are complicated. The brain is very complicated, I think to be an investigative journalist, you've got to be driven, right? Because it really makes no sense. If you're drawing up a business plan, it makes no sense. I mean, it requires a lot of manpower hours or man-person hours. I don't want to use any term that's inappropriate these days. A lot of hours, let's just leave it at that, right? To investigate, to research, it costs money, because you need to purchase documents, subscribe to different database services. And then when you finally get something together, the chances are you're going to be sued.
Yeah.
And listen, when I was sued in 1997 by Mark Harris, from beginning to end being he appealed the decision that this is the libel action, and the libel action was affirmed on appeal, so he lost every step. But my cost was about $165,000 in 97, 98. I think he sued me in 98. So at that time, and you can factor in inflation when trying to determine how much that's worth now, but it cost me like 160, 165 from beginning to end. So you're going to, spend money on the lawsuits. And I had 3 lawsuits on the go at one stage. So it makes no sense. So why are you doing it? And I think you're probably going to have some sort of rage inside you, and so, which is probably not healthy to have rage inside you, I don't think. I don't know where it, I don't know, I really don't, I could sit here and say, I hate fraudsters and all of this, but maybe that's part of, I do hate fraudsters, honestly, dishonesty, it pisses me off. None of us like to get swindled,
No, that's right.
And listen, I'm trying to make money, when I launched OffshoreAlert and Inside Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, for example, at that time used to promote itself as the 5th largest financial market in the world. So, Cayman Islands, the population was about 25,000 at that time. It's like, wow, and when is this true? And what is the criteria? But I'm not really reading any stories about the individuals and entities, doing business in these offshore financial centers. There would be, every once in a while, there'd be a Wall Street Journal, a New York Times, the Daily Mail, the Times of London story, and it would be full of cliches, about offshore financial centers. So I thought, I think if these offshore financial centers really are transacting significant dollar amounts of business, there must be a business opportunity here, because nobody's providing information on them. So, it's not all altruistic. I am trying to make money. But in terms of, putting up with all the threats and everything, I honestly don't know, to be honest. Clearly there's something going on in my brain, you know, that I'm not arrogant enough to even say to you, I understand it, you know. But it's not a job for a normal person.
No, definitely not. Especially if you're getting threats coming up to conferences, right? Because you're public, you're there, you attend,
Yeah.
you know.
But, you know, nobody's, you know, the only time I've been, I'm going to use this word, assaulted, right, in air quotes, because I didn't even consider it to be an assault, but somebody did push me, right, which is technically, you know, ABH, right, in England, right, technically, right, you know, but, you know, I wasn't going to run into anyone. It was in Evan Vale, you know, it wasn't like, it was before I even started exposing all this international fraud, right? I was, when I worked in Evan Vale, I used to cover Tredegar Magistrates Court on a Tuesday, Evan Vale Magistrates Court on a Wednesday, Abertillery Magistrates Court on a Thursday. So certainly at that time, every criminal case in the UK would originate at a magistrates court. So you could be accused of killing, you know, being a serial killer, killing, you know, 50 people. Okay, you know, eventually that's going to work its way up to Crown Court, but it would originate in a magistrates court. So, you know, and it was a great grounding,
right?
You know,
yeah, but
as a journalist, just covering these, you know, and pretty much. I mean, listen, there were some bestiality cases involving sheep and dogs. Most of the cases were assault that took place, you know, between 11 p.m. and 11:45 in the queue at the local Indian takeaway, right? Where, you know, because there was nothing to do in Abervale. There was no nightclub or anything. The pubs closed at 11. But some guy used to see his ex-girlfriend with a new boyfriend in line and yada, yada, yada. Fisticuffs would ensue, you know. So I was walking down the street in Abervale. I remember I was reading a newspaper and somebody pushed me, you know, like sucker pushed me, if you like, you know. I was just walking down minding my own business and somebody pushed me. And it was somebody who'd been involved in one of these cases, you know.
Right.
Understood. I think it was a guy who, his father was a counsellor. And the son had been in court because drugs had been found. I was covering this case. Drugs had been found at this address, and it would have been a nothing case. But you know, I recognized the address as being the home of the counsellor, and of course, it's really drugs found at a local counsellor's home.
There you go.
Even though they belonged to his son, allegedly, you know. And anyway, that was the guy who pushed me, and I didn't think anything of it. But it's the only time I've been physically touched as a result of anything I've written. Everything else, the death threats, the lawsuits, and everything else, didn't involve anyone physically, you know, touching me.
Right. So we're almost out of time, but before we close off, I want to talk about the Offshore Alerts conferences coming up. So it gives you a chance to sort of explain what they are, what type of people should be attending. I'll put the link up as well on the screen, so if anyone's interested, give us an idea of. Because these Offshore Alert conferences, if you've never been to one, are very interesting because there's a room full of different groups of people that all can benefit from each other. So explain it, David, just a little bit.
So Offshore Alert covers high-value international finance. The conferences reflect that. And the aim is to show people how to avoid problems, to do everything they can to avoid problems. However, problems are inevitable in high-value international finance. Anything involving money, particularly large numbers of money, you can't avoid disputes. Even, you know, a lot of disputes are just, you know, like there's a difference of opinion, right? There's no good guy or bad guy, right? There's a lack of clarity, and you go to the courts to seek clarity to define wording and contracts and everything else. So we show you how to resolve those disputes satisfactorily, hopefully before arbitration or litigation. But you know what? If these disputes are litigated or arbitrated, we will introduce you to litigators, you know, to people who can help you. And then if you get a judgment, well, if you can't realize any value on that judgment or an award, then what sort of victory have you received? Not much of one. We will introduce you to asset recovery specialists. Everyone needs each other. You could be an asset manager, a professional service provider, an attorney, an investor, a victim. Everyone needs each other, either now or in the future. And it doesn't matter. Listen, you make a mistake in high value international finance, you're fucked, basically, right? You're going to lose a lot of money, or your clients are going to lose money. You're going to lose your reputation. You make a mistake, so you need to, no matter if you're thinking of making an investment, you're thinking about going into partnership with somebody, you're thinking about taking somebody on as a client, it all involves some level of research. Credible research, right? Not Mickey Mouse research, right? You can't just go to Google and that's it, right? Everyone needs to do some level of research, either themselves or they need to know people who can help them. So we bring everyone together. That's the aim. It's a very eclectic group. And it's, the sessions, we try and put on interesting sessions. So, for example, one of the best known criminal cases in recent years is the indictment of FIFA officials, right? Well, the catalyst of that was OffshoreAlert's Miami conference, where 5 years before the indictments, we had a session put on by a now deceased British journalist called Andrew Jennings, great journalist. And he gave a presentation, and I told him, you've got to name names. Andrew, just go for it, FIFA sent me a threatening letter before the event, whatever. US law enforcement interviewed Andrew after his presentation. I'm not sure if it was immediately after his presentation or sometime after, days, weeks, whatever. Yada, yada, yada. 5 years later, you had the Eastern District of New York charged, several people, which we all read about. So we try to put on really interesting sessions that, the acid test is you drag 10 people off the street. Can I put them in, watching a session, and would they be entertained and informed? That's sort of my test. And then the people do business with each other at the networking events, and there are cocktail receptions and so forth. So they're good fun. They're valuable in terms of people doing business. I encourage anyone to come along. If you're an investigator, a litigator, asset recovery, doesn't matter what your role is. If you're involved in anything involving lots of money, this is aimed at you.
Thanks, David. The details for Offshore Alert conference in London, the 1st and 2nd of December, are coming up on the screen now. Click through, all the information's there on the website, and there's other conferences throughout the years to come. David Marchant, I knew this would be a really great discussion. Thank you for coming on today. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.